Today, we're diving into the incredible history of Madagascar. And let me tell you, it's a story that's way more complex than you might think. It's a story of resilience, of a truly unique identity forged by people from two totally different continents, all shaped by some seriously turbulent politics.
So, let's just jump right into the biggest puzzle of all. You look at a map, right? Madagascar is sitting right there, off the coast of Africa. So you'd think its people, its language, would be African. But they're not. Not entirely anyway. The language and the core culture trace back thousands of miles to Southeast Asia. For centuries, nobody could figure this out. So, what's the deal? How on earth did that happen?
All right, to figure this out, we've got to go way, way back. All the way back to the very first people who made an extraordinary journey to this uninhabited island, laying the foundation for what would become the Malagasy people.
So, for a super long time, Madagascar was pretty much empty of people. We think foragers might have visited as far back as 2000 BCE. There's some potential evidence, like cut marks on lemur bones, but these were just visits, not permanent homes. It wasn't until around 490 CE, that's almost 2,500 years later, that we find the first hard evidence of people actually arriving to stay for good.
And who were these first settlers? Well, in Malagasy oral tradition, they're known as the Vahoka Nintalo, which translates to the first men. And get this, the name itself probably comes from ancient words meaning people of the canoe. How perfect is that? Because that's exactly how they got there, in these amazing outrigger canoes, having crossed the entire Indian Ocean from what is now Indonesia.
This migration created one of the most fascinating cultural blends on the entire planet. You see, the Malagasy identity comes from two major streams. First, you have the Austronesians from Borneo. They brought the language, crops like rice and taro, and the core cultural traditions. Then, a bit later, Bantu-speaking migrants arrived from East Africa, bringing things like the iconic zebu cattle. Over centuries, these two groups mixed, creating a truly blended Afro-Asian heritage that is just so incredibly rare.
Okay, so the island's population is established and growing. Naturally, it becomes this buzzing hub right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And when you get trade and new people showing up, you also get, you guessed it, powerful kingdoms, pirates, and a whole lot of conflict. From the 700s onward, it was like a revolving door of new influences. Omani Arabs set up trading posts, bringing Islam and an Arabic script called Sorabe. You had another wave of Austronesians, the Hova, arriving from powerful maritime states in Southeast Asia. And Bantu traders from the Swahili coast continued to come over. Each group just kept adding new layers to the island's culture.
But when European traders showed up, especially slavers, things took a really dark turn. It created this absolutely devastating cycle. Here's how it worked. A coastal kingdom would trade captured people to Europeans. In exchange, they'd get firearms. Armed with these new superior weapons, they could go conquer their neighbors, which of course meant more captives. And what did they do with those captives? They sold them for even more guns. This horrific engine of conflict just completely reshaped the island.
So while all this is happening on the coasts, something very different is brewing in the island's interior. Up in the central highlands, the Merina people are consolidating power, and they have one huge ambition: to unite the entire island under their rule. And that ambition is perfectly captured by their king, Merina, who famously said, "The sea is the boundary of my rice field." What a line. He wasn't just a conqueror, though. He was a unifier. He reunited all the different Merina groups, created new laws, and expanded farming to stop famines, all while setting his sights on the whole island.
And it was his son, Radama I, who made that dream a reality. He was incredibly savvy. He allied with the British, agreeing to help them end the slave trade in exchange for military training, weapons, and, this is the big one, formal recognition as the King of Madagascar. With his modern army, he expanded Merina control over most of the island.
But after Radama's death, things took a dramatic and brutal turn. His successor, Queen Renovalona I, completely reversed his policies. She fiercely rejected European influence. Her reign was marked by isolation, persecution of Christians, and constant warfare. And the cost was just staggering. It's estimated the island's population was cut in half, dropping by 2.5 million people in just 6 years.
The decades that followed were just a political whirlwind. Radama II tried to reopen the island and was quickly assassinated. Then a series of queens, Razahirana, Renovalona II, and finally Renovalona III, tried to play this dangerous diplomatic game, signing treaties with Britain and France, trying to maintain their sovereignty as colonial ambitions grew all around them.
In the end, though, the scramble for Africa was just too powerful.
The complex game of diplomacy the Merina monarchy had been planned for decades was about to come to a very definitive and very violent end.
France invaded in two separate wars. The first one forced Madagascar to give up some territory. The second, in 1895, was a full-scale invasion. The French marched on the capital, Antananarivo, and took it. But here's a wild fact. The true enemy for the French wasn't the Malagasy army. Only 20 French soldiers died fighting. 6,000 of them died from malaria and other diseases.
With the capital taken, the French moved fast. In 1897, they just abolished the monarchy. A dynasty that had ruled for over a century was gone. They sent the last queen, Ranavalona III, into exile in Algeria. And just like that, an entire era of Malagasy independence came to a close.
Life under French rule was a bag of contradictions. On one hand, they abolished slavery, freeing 500,000 people, a huge deal. But then they turned around and imposed new systems of forced labor on plantations. Opportunities were limited, and this fueled a growing nationalist movement that exploded in the Malagasy Uprising of 1947. It was a bloody rebellion that was ultimately and brutally crushed.
But the fight for freedom wasn't over. After decades of colonial rule, Madagascar would finally regain its independence. The problem was, the path to becoming a stable, modern nation would be filled with its own challenges.
Madagascar got its independence in 1960, but what followed was a cycle of political upheaval. You had a First Republic, then a coup. That led to a socialist Second Republic. The end of the Cold War brought in a democratic Third Republic, but that didn't bring stability either, with major political crises and power struggles in 2002 and again in 2009.
And that pattern of instability has continued right up to the present. The nation has had to navigate one crisis after another. As recently as October 2025, massive protests led to the military seizing power and installing a new president. Just another dramatic turn in a long history of political turmoil.
When you look back at it all, it's just such an incredible story. From those first canoe people who crossed an entire ocean, to the kingdoms they built, to the struggles of the modern era, the one thing that defines Madagascar's history is resilience, which really makes you wonder, what will the next chapter hold for this remarkable island?
If you enjoyed this overview, we've got a whole playlist of quick country histories you should definitely check out. And be sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more deep dives. Thanks for watching.